Hold on to your parkas, folks, because Antarctica is hiding more than just ice and penguins. From mysterious pyramids to fossilized forests, this frozen continent has revealed some of the most mind-boggling discoveries in history. Get ready to journey to the bottom of the world, where the strangest artifacts and anomalies lie buried beneath layers of ice, waiting to rewrite everything we thought we knew about Earth's past.
First on our list today, we have the discovery and revival of an ancient virus freed from the Antarctic permafrost after 48,500 years. Oh my gosh, have we learned nothing from sci-fi and television? You do not restore ancient viruses. You don't do it. Well, they did it. The zombie virus was discovered as a result of melting ice in the Antarctic region after laying dormant for tens of thousands of years. And honestly, scientists believe that while the risks are low, much like your ex, it does raise red flags as a potential endangerment to human health. The virus was returned to its former infectious glory in a lab after being inserted with cultured cells. Luckily for us, as of yet, scientists have only attempted to reanimate viruses that target single-cell amoebas, not humans or animals. That's great and all, but it still seems like pretty risky business to me. The scientist who performed the reanimation maintains he has done so to shed light on the potential risk of more dangerous viruses' ability to resurface and affect humans should the Antarctic permafrost continue to melt. Not only that, but as the ice continues to thaw, it also has the potential to release chemical and radioactive waste into our ecosystems. So, think about that. Next up, we have the discovery of a hidden landmass frozen in time and ice and estimated to be bigger than Belgium. The landscape consists of hills and valleys believed to have been carved by ancient rivers over millions of years ago. Its existence was confirmed using a technique called radio echo sounding, which uses sound waves to determine distances based off of which corresponding maps of underground structures and landscapes can be created. Without even laying eyes on an area, we are able to determine the heights of its peaks and the depths of its deepest points. The area of land stretching 32,000 square kilometers, 12,000 square miles, is a scientific marvel, as scientists believe its climate and geology to have been massively different from that of modern-day Antarctica. Which of course brings me to my next point. Also discovered within the ice and hidden beneath the frozen desert were the remains of an estimated 90-million-year-old subtropical rainforest. Scientists were so excited when, deep beneath the ice, they discovered an incredibly well-preserved network of root systems within a sediment core sample. A sediment core sample is basically like a ground extraction that shows all the layers of sediment that have settled over the last, I guess in this case, 90 million years. Not only did they find root systems, but the soil was so well preserved that they were also able to find traces of pollen, spores, and the remains of flowering plants. Based on these findings, it was concluded that the coast of West Antarctica at one point in time contained a thick, swampy rainforest which was home to a large variety of plant and animal species. Scientists also concluded weather patterns of heavy rainfall and heightened levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Next on the list, we have BLOOD Falls. I apologize for having to spell it out for you. I don't think I'm allowed to say that word on here, but just by the look, I'm sure you can guess where the name comes from. So let's talk about the color. If you want to guess how it happens, I'll give you a moment. Maybe pause the video, head to the comments, lock in your answer. You done? Okay, the answer is iron, but not in the way you'd think. The red waters are rich in iron, but they don't actually turn red until they come into contact with the air. Well, maybe you did think that, but let me explain further. It's actually a mix of iron oxides and hydroxides along with high salt content in the water, chlorine, and magnesium that give the river flow its yellow, orange, and reddish coloring rather than the classic like murky brown we would usually see coming out of eroded sink faucets. Super creepy, but again, super cool. Next up, we have the discovery of ancient bacteria like nothing we've ever seen on Earth before. Like, it's so strange, scientists wonder if it might possibly have come from like outer space. Perhaps a passenger on an ancient asteroid that arrived on Earth millions of years ago. And why do they think that? Well, because generally bacteria has a minimum requirement of 6 things it needs in order to survive, and those things are food, acidity, time, generally a warm temperature, oxygen, and moisture. But this bacteria just needs air, making it an absolute scientific anomaly and a massive discovery that moves us forward in our understanding of the way in which extraterrestrial organisms might be able to survive on other planets and in space. What do you guys think? As we move past our halfway point, let's go beneath the ice all the way down to the Antarctic seafloor, where the once lost ship Endurance was discovered in impeccable condition, preserved by the country's icy waters. For a long time, the Endurance shipwreck remained one of the greatest undiscovered mysteries, but that all changed in 2022 when, at a depth of 3,008 meters, the vessel was found, and that's 9,868.8 feet. The discovery was made via a combination of helicopters, underwater robots, and other state-of-the-art technology, which allowed it to be remotely filmed and explored. Although the wreck was crushed by ice and sunk over 100 years ago, the ship's name was still clearly legible along the stern of the vessel. And this is an incredible scientific feat, as it highlights the extreme advances in technology, allowing us to explore some of the most inhospitable and extreme depths of our oceans. And next up, we have a freaky looking, lanky underwater insect known as the giant sea spider. While they aren't actually spiders, they are in fact part of the insect family, and they are the largest sea spider found anywhere in the world, with some showing off a leg span of up to 10 inches. Ooh. These animals belong to a rare group that have no need for a respiratory system, breathing instead through their digestive system. The animal typically feeds off anemones, seaworms, jellyfish, sponges, and soft corals, making it technically carnivorous, and it feeds using a small tube which it inserts into its soft-bodied prey, allowing it to literally suck their guts out. Gross. As for the spider's guts, those are stored in the long, spindly legs of the creature, commonly found in shallow waters surrounding Antarctica. However, they have also been spotted at depths of 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, making them highly adaptable to changes in both pressure and environment. Next up, we have another relative giant, the giant Antarctic scaleworm, which measures in at 20 centimeters, 7.8 inches long, and 10 centimeters, 4 inches wide. Now, that might not seem gigantic to you, but remember, it's a worm, so yeah, it's pretty big. And it's also super uncomfortable to look at. Well, from head on, but the underbelly is actually quite cool, looking as though the creature is lined with shiny gold feathers along its edges, which are actually appendages that help it move along rock formations and the sea floor. Its back is covered in scales that act as fully functioning body armor to protect against predators. Back to the head, which is, to put it nicely, unpleasant, and it's not even a head, really, it's just a fully retractable throat. While there is still so much we don't know about this recently discovered creature, the two sharp fangs on both its top and bottom jaw suggest it has a carnivorous diet and hunting rather than scavenging behavior. The animal is known to enjoy depths of up to 1,640 feet, and they're also super good for the underwater ecosystem, assisting in the building of reefs by recycling ocean waste through a process called worm composting, where they turn food scraps into other organic material that acts like soil for the sea floor. Next up, in our top two today, we have Mount Erebus, the world's southernmost, fully active volcano that last erupted in 2020 and contains a very elusive lava lake. The lava lake sits within the volcano, and it's basically a pool of molten lava that never hardens, but instead remains in a constant viscous fluid state. While you might have assumed this kind of thing to exist at the bottom of every active volcano around the world, you'd be incorrect, as they are actually incredibly rare because they require an incredibly specific set of conditions to be able to form. You see, a volcano's lava is generally held way underground in something called a magma chamber that connects to a volcano through an underground channel in the Earth's crust. And ever so often, under the right conditions, the magma chamber sends lava shooting up through the channel and the crater of the volcano into the atmosphere. A lava lake is different. It exists above ground within the crater of a volcano, and the bottom of the lake is connected to the magma chamber by a much shorter passageway called a conduit, which is basically like a long pipe. The lava from the chamber rises into the lake, and when the lava begins to cool, it moves back down towards the chamber to heat and rise once more. Thus, the lake remains unfrozen and in constant flow. Also a pretty cool sight to see. And finally, last on the list, we have ancient skulls, or at least that's what they kind of look like. These elongated skulls were allegedly found in 2016 by a team of archaeologists working in Antarctica. The discovery was shocking, and the bones dated all the way back to 1820, and it was originally believed that humans had not set foot in Antarctica until hundreds of years later. Of course, the timeline, along with the appearance of the bones, has led many to speculate that these bones are not belonging to the first humans in Antarctica, but rather the first extraterrestrials on Earth. While scientists are still baffled by the age of the bones, the shape of them didn't come as too much of a surprise to professionals, as the elongated skulls have been discovered in other places around the world and have been attributed to ritualistic physical cultural practices done by certain ancient societies. It has been said, however, that these particular skulls appear to not only be elongated, but much bigger than any to have ever been found before. So, who knows, maybe aliens aren't such a bad guess after all. Alright, first things first, what is the Piri-Reis map? Well, it's a world map drawn on gazelle skin written in 1513 that really shouldn't exist. Why? Well, because it depicts recently discovered places and even undiscovered places with a surprising amount of accuracy, which is of course virtually impossible, but somehow it's possible. I mean, clearly it's possible, the thing exists, doesn't it? But like how? Well, I'm glad you asked. It is believed that the map was created using 8 Greco-Roman maps, 4 Portuguese maps, an Arabic map, and 1 drawn by Christopher Columbus himself. Today the map, which supposedly discovered and described Antarctica centuries before anyone else in the world, is kept in Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Well, part of it is. You see, the entire map has never been viewed in modern times, only 1/3 of it. The rest is yet to be found. It makes you wonder though, what else could we have gotten wrong about our history? Maybe one day we'll find out.
The Piri-Reis map was discovered by accident in 1929 during renovations at the Topkapi Palace in Turkey. The palace was being converted into a museum when researchers stumbled on it tucked away in a dusty corner. What they found was a fragment of an ancient world map by Ottoman admiral named Piri-Reis. Piri-Reis was not only a skilled sailor but also a cartographer, and he had meticulously compiled this map using, as Hannah described, a number of older maps. The parts of the map that still exist show parts of Europe, Africa, the Americas, and of course, Antarctica, potentially. We'll get to that in a bit though. And for a map created over 500 years ago, this is pretty amazing, as Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820 and wasn't mapped out until later, so there are tons of questions and theories surrounding the Piri-Reis map. Does it contain knowledge from some lost ancient civilization or aliens? How's the thing so advanced? Now that you have some context, we're to get into the weeds.
Alright, let's talk about continental drift, shall we? That's right, according to the Piri-Reis map, at one point in time Antarctica was actually not all that cold, and also it was connected to South America, which is insane, but not in the way you think. The idea that Antarctica was once connected to South America makes total sense. I mean, the world used to consist of one single landmass that eventually broke away to form continents. What's insane is that the map was able to depict that. Now, I previously mentioned that Antarctica wasn't discovered until long after this map was completed, but perhaps it was. It just wasn't its own thing yet. I mean, it's entirely possible. And it's not like the map shows a frigid Antarctica nestled up next to the subtropical South Americas. The two appear to share the same climate and weather patterns. There is no ice depicted on Antarctica in this map, but more on that after this.
One of the biggest mysteries about the Piri-Reis map is its lines. Now, the map doesn't have the latitude and longitude lines you see on modern maps, which run east, west, north, and south. Today, we can measure longitude and latitude accurately using GPS and precise clocks, but in the early 1500s, when this map was created, this was almost impossible. The problem with measuring longitude back then was that it required knowing the exact time at 2 different places simultaneously. Sailors could measure latitude using the sun and stars, but without a reliable way to keep track of time, determining longitude was a huge challenge. The invention that finally solved this problem was the marine chronometer, which was a special clock that kept accurate time at sea, but this wasn't invented until about 200 years after Piri-Reis created his map. But the Piri-Reis map does have what are called azimuth lines, which end up being strangely very accurate to modern maps, to the point where it seems virtually impossible for the map map to have been created when it was. So, how did Perry Reese manage to create a map with such accuracy for the time? Well, we'll be getting into theories in a bit.
Alright, let's get back to climate, specifically Antarctica's climate, and even more specifically Antarctica's climate at the time in which this map was created. A climate that was subtropical and supported a lush rainforest filled with various coniferous trees, flowering plants, giant mushrooms, and animals. While this might sound crazy to some, the map shows Antarctica connected to the subtropical region of South America, so it must be true. Well, no, an ancient map does not the truth make. But what does prove the existence of an ancient rainforest existing in Antarctica and also validate the Perry Reese map is a core sample taken by scientists in Antarctica in 2017 that shows every layer of sediment that has settled on the continent over the past 90 million years, give or take. Ancient root systems perfectly preserved in soil samples along with traces of pollen, spores, and the remains of flowering plants were all found in the core sample. From this, scientists were able to determine what the weather would have been like in order to support such a wide range of life. Heavy rainfall and heightened levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, i.e., it would have been a rainforest.
Now, the pieces of the map we still have today don't show Antarctica in full. We're not even 100% sure if Perry Reese was depicting Antarctica or just assuming there was some landmass there that didn't really exist. Like Anna mentioned, there's a depiction near the southern tip of South America on the map. Instead of accurately showing the continent's true shape, it bends eastward and takes up a big portion of the map's lower half. Some think it's a mistake, some think it is an early interpretation of Antarctica. Again, it's not shown having ice, contrary to what we know today. Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. It was only ice-free during prehistoric times. So a lot of historians think that what's actually shown on the Perry Reese map is his assumption of what the South American continent might have looked like.
Alright, hear me out for a sec, because there are some theories surrounding how the hell some random man named Perry Reese was able to map the world so accurately in the year 1513 with no aerial views or GPS devices. And of course, one of those theories is aliens, or some kind of advanced ancient civilization that far surpassed the abilities of humans in ancient times and possibly the ability of humans today. Who knows? As I said, the Perry Reese map was discovered in 1929, in the early 20th century, and it is believed to date back to the 16th century, circa 1513. Not only would it have been incredibly difficult to have mapped out Antarctica, an undiscovered continent, back in the 16th century, it was also incredibly hard to do it in 1929 as well. Why? Well, because Antarctica was only discovered in 1820 and it wasn't mapped out until 1983. So what the heck did Perry Reese have that we didn't until 470 years later? Well, perhaps some help from an advanced extraterrestrial being or ancient civilization with access to air travel and advanced mapping technologies. I mean, I know it sounds far-fetched, but like really, how could anyone have created this map back then with no help? I just don't buy it. I don't think he deserves all the credit.
Let's talk more about that theory about a highly advanced but lost ancient civilization creating the map, or at least, giving some of their knowledge and expertise. Along with the maps Perry Reese collected from around the world, he could have had access to ancient maps or texts from lost civilizations who had advanced knowledge of geography and map making. As for what this civilization could have been, I mean, go wild. Obviously, though, Atlantis gets theorized about the most. This could explain why large chunks of the map are missing, or why so much of the information in it predates stuff we only thought became common knowledge many, many years later. Who knows, it may have all gone down with Atlantis. It's a fun idea.
Another interesting thing about the Perry Reese map is that it's possible that some of it was written in code, and therefore there is some of it that we might not understand or may have possibly misinterpreted, meaning there may still be secrets hidden within the map waiting to be uncovered. Only problem is, as I said, only 1/3 of the map has been found to date. So while it is entirely possible that the world comes together and pieces the entire thing back together, with the location of each piece possibly being a clue to cracking the hidden code drawn out on the ancient hide, it's also entirely possible that the secrets of Perry Reese's world map map, the second world map, are unfortunately lost to the world forever. Either that or there's actually just no code and no secrets, and the whole thing is just some boring, incredibly accurate, super advanced anomaly, but where's the fun in that?
And, in terms of codes and stuff, there could be another aspect to this, a more symbolic interpretation here. Some hidden meanings to the map other than just geography. Some experts and enthusiasts of the map think that there could be areas drawn or named that might carry meanings more rooted in ancient beliefs or cultural ideas. For example, ancient cities or mythical creatures that are depicted on the map could have represented political power at the time, religious significance, or even navigational clues that were only understood by sailors of that time. The symbols and intricate details on the map has led to some speculation that it might have been more than just a practical tool for navigation. It could have been more of a canvas for expressing knowledge about the world that went beyond what was known publicly. Some even wonder if it might have encoded secrets or esoteric knowledge known to only select groups or societies back then. Who knows?
Starting off number 10 now, we have blood falls. In 1911, scientists noticed something pretty horrifying around cliffs in Antarctica. It looked like some of them were oozing blood. It shocked the world. What could possibly be producing these rivers of blood? Was there something hidden within the ice that we didn't know about? Something that could only exist in these hostile alien conditions of Antarctica? At the time, scientists believed it was being caused by algae discoloring the water. The hypothesis was never verified though. In 2017, the mystery was finally solved thanks to research by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The deep red coloring is due to oxidized iron in brine salt water. It's essentially the same process that makes iron go dark red when it rusts. When the iron-rich salt water comes into contact with the oxygen on the surface, the iron oxidizes and this colors the water and ice red. I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief now that there isn't some hellish blood monster living under the Antarctic ice. Next up at number 9 now, we have the abandoned huts. On November 1st, 1911, British explorer Robert Falcon Scott departed from Cape Evans on his Terra Nova expedition, trying to become the first human to reach the South Pole. They made it to the South Pole, but sadly they found they had been beaten to it by a group of Norwegians led by Amundsen. The team faced unusually bad weather on their return journey and tragically died before they could even reach their hut with all of their supplies. The hut was used by another team in 1917, but after that it was abandoned. For years it was slowly covered in ice and snow until 1956 when a US expeditionary party dug it out. It was found to be in a remarkably well preserved state. The beds were as they left them, so too were their scientific instruments. Canned food still sits on the shelves. A London newspaper from that time is on one of the desks. The frozen and dry environment of Antarctica have preserved a lot of things, but decay does still occur there. Visitors to the Discovery Hut discovered the now century-old seal meat as smelling quite rancid, and some people thought that the huts themselves are now affected by fungal decay. Moving on to number 8 now, we have bacteria. In 2008, scientists managed to revive bacterium extracted from Antarctic ice that was 8 million years old. You heard me right, 8 million years. Right away, many people became concerned. Was this a danger? It sounded a bit like the start of a Hollywood movie where the bacteria goes on to wipe out the whole of humanity. The scientists assured the public though that there was nothing to worry about and that the bacteria was unlikely to cause human diseases. You'll note that they said unlikely though. It's not definitely impossible. This bacteria is so old that when it came into existence 8 million years ago, the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees was alive on the planet. So, how are these things still alive? Well, Paul Falowski of Rutgers University described the bacteria as having been in a suspended state of animation for 8 million years, and that global warming melting glaciers could result in the release of more ancient organisms into the sea. Next up at number 7 now, we have the pyramid. In November 2016, the internet was abuzz with talk of a pyramid that had been found buried in the Antarctic ice. Now before you dismiss this as nonsense, take a look at this picture. Yeah, that does look a lot like a pyramid. It was first discovered by the British Antarctic expedition of 1910 to 1913. They were stunned by its appearance and decided to name it the Pyramid, a name still used on geological surveys of the area. It's located in the Ellsworth Mountains, which is a range more than 400 kilometers long. The pyramid is one of the peaks of this mountain range. Naturally, you know what I'm going to say next. Many conspiracy theorists stated that this is proof of an ancient civilization that lived on Antarctica before being consumed by the ice and their existence covered up by today's governments. Of course, experts have dismissed all of this, saying that pyramids are not a complicated shape and are not an uncommon appearance in nature. What do you guys think? Next up at number 6 now we have the lake. Lake Vostok is one of the biggest lakes on the planet. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, that's probably because Lake Vostok is buried underneath more than 2 miles of ice in Antarctica. It's been covered in ice for at least 15 million years, but it's still liquid down there. The crushing layer of ice from above and geothermal activity below have ensured that. Its presence was first suggested in the 1960s by a Russian pilot who noticed a large smooth patch of ice above the lake from the air. Radar experiments by British and Russian researchers in 1996 confirmed the lake's existence. The lake is massive, 143 miles long, 31 miles wide, and up to 2,625 feet deep. In 2012, Russian scientists managed to successfully drill a hole down to the lake's water. They believe that down there is microbial life that is unique from everything else here on Earth, having been isolated for 15 million years. Now the search begins. Next up at number 5 now we have Allen Hills 84001. In 1984, a team of US meteorite hunters discovered a Martian meteorite in Antarctica's ice. It was only about 4.3 pounds, but by 1996 it was causing quite a stir when a group of scientists claimed they had found evidence of microscopic life in the actual meteorite. Was this proof of life on Mars, or at least that life used to be on Mars because they thought it was fossilized? The media went into a frenzy either way. Even US President Bill Clinton gave a speech about it. The hysteria was because the strange chain structures on that meteorite looked like they could have been fossilized bacteria. There was also the fact that the meteorite broke off from Mars about 17 million years ago during a time when Mars had liquid water on its surface and carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. It seemed like life could have been around then. Eventually these claims were rejected though, and the features of the meteorite were explained without requiring life to be present. The meteorite now remains on display in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the dinosaur. In February 2019, the fossil of a new species of reptile was announced. It had been found by researchers in the Antarctic ice during a 2010-2011 expedition. It's believed to be an early relative of dinosaurs who lived in Antarctica millions of years before the continent drifted to its position over the South Pole and became uninhabitable for most complex life forms. Around 250 million years ago, Antarctica was covered in lush forests and rivers with many species of wildlife living there, including reptiles. The temperature is thought to have almost never dropped below freezing point. The scientists named the iguana-sized reptile Antarctanax shackletoni. Antarctanax translates to Antarctic King, and Shackletoni is in honor of the Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton. Moving on to number 3 now, we have patchy mass. In June 2018, YouTube user Wow For Real made a video showing his discovery of a 14-mile structure buried in Antarctica. He made the discovery using Google Maps and described it as a patchy mass that you could easily see from outer space. He said he'd used Google Maps to search the entire continent before and had never found anything like this. He even pointed out that there were strange brush strokes over the mass, which made him think someone was trying to cover this up. It didn't take long before people started speculating about what was going on here. The YouTuber himself put forward the idea that if the brush effect was removed, perhaps we'd see some sort of giant UFO mothership buried in ice. In all probability, it's probably just a research facility, but we still don't know for sure yet, as this strange block still remains on Google Maps to this day. You can even go and see it for yourself. Coming in number 2 now, we have the wreckage. In January 2013, 3 Canadian men took off in a plane from the Amundsen Scott South Pole Research Station en route to an Italian research base in Terra Nova Bay. At some point during the journey, the emergency transmitter went off and a search party was sent out to find them. Bad weather hampered rescue efforts, and after 6 days they finally found the plane, but it was too late to save them. It had crashed into one of Antarctica's highest mountains. The rescue team were unable to get into the cockpit and were only able to retrieve some luggage. After 4 hours there, they determined it was too risky to stay any longer as the weather was taking a serious turn for the worse, and they were afraid of an avalanche occurring. It took 9 months before another team set out during Antarctica's summer period to retrieve the frozen remains of the 3 Canadian men. And finally, number 1 now, we have Endurance. We talked about the explorer Shackleton earlier. Well, Endurance was the name of the ship that he used to go to Antarctica in the first place. The ship was abandoned by Shackleton and his team when she was crushed by ice in the Weddell Sea off Antarctica, causing her to sink. In the years since then, there have been 3 expeditions that have tried and failed to locate Endurance. In 2018, that changed though. A team at the Scott Polar Research Institute launched a new search using more sophisticated technology, such such as GPS and drones to help them see possible routes in the ice. They also used an autonomous underwater vehicle. The video you're watching right now was released in February 2019, and according to what I've read, the search for Endurance is happening at this moment, looking for a ship thousands of feet beneath the frigid waves. I thought I'd end on this one because it's not been discovered quite yet, and that's kind of exciting. There's a lot more to uncover in the incredible world of Antarctica.
Kicking off the list at number 10, sea pigs. This list gets creepy and or crawly, but first we gotta ease into the Arctic Ocean. We gotta start off this haunting list with the sea pig. Look at this little guy, okay, the pug of the ocean. He looks like a stress ball with feelings. What's going on with him? They look like something that would be microscopic, but really they're 6 inches long, wide, around, big, I don't know, they're pretty large. They stick together, and I mean that in a literal sense. Sea pigs will travel in large gatherings. They live in the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean, so they're hard to find, really. Their mating routine is also still a mystery. We have no idea how they do it. And just by looking at them, we're like, no guesses, certainly no guesses from me. All we know is that they travel in groups, so I don't know. Sounds like it's a good time, at least. Lifespan and mating life, total mystery. All we know is that they eat decaying matter on the ocean floor. Kudos to the crew over at Mbari. The footage they find of these deep sea creatures is always fascinating. It's always so otherworldly over at Mbari. Are you guys hiring? I'm afraid of the ocean, but you know, I'll do some behind the scenes stuff, who knows. I'll just edit the weird fish. I'll put the text in. Like, what the f is this? Ooh. Number 9, rock bottom. A little over a year ago, scientists camped out in the middle of the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf for nearly 3 months. Why? All in the name of science. Yeah, we're getting cold. Geologist James Smith from the British Antarctic Survey slept in a tent. Who does this? Why do you choose to do this? James Smith, apparently. Here we go. He flew 5 hours out to this ice shelf. Him and his team had to melt 20 tons of snow in order to pour hot water through this ice shelf for 30 hours straight. When the team lowered their gear down through this 3,000 feet of ice, they couldn't get a sample of sediment from the ocean floor because they hit a boulder. I mean, the odds here alone, I mean, the entire seafloor is basically flat and they end up hitting this thing. At first they were frustrated, but this boulder that is 160 miles away from daylight is home to microbial malts, these alien-like sponges. These cylindrical sponges, possibly hydroids. I love seeing scientists get jazzed about stuff. They're like, oh, this rock had absolutely no business being here. Like, guy, you just melted through ice for 20 hours in the middle of Antarctica. I feel like it's the other way around. Imagine if those sea sponges could talk. They're like, oh, of all the spots, really? Please close that. The first shred of light, and it's just a big GoPro coming at them. They're like, what is that? Number 8, emperor penguins. They're as glorious as their name hints towards. I remember watching Happy Feet a lot growing up. I was really into penguins and tap dancing for a hot minute there. That movie changed the game. The main penguins here, they're all emperor penguins. Robin Williams' character, Lovelace, he's a rock hopper penguin with the cool, you know, the fluffy eyebrows. The other guys are all emperor penguins. The colorful orange necks, the OG characters, they're all beautiful. They're the largest penguins on the planet, and their breeding habits set them aside from the rest. Once the female lays an egg, I'm not gonna do sound effects for this whole process. I don't know why I did that. That's so stupid. Once the female lays an egg, she'll leave it with her mate for an incubation period, but she'll walk over 50 miles to the ocean just to get food. The mate has to fast for around 100 days just waiting for his next meal. Once in the water, these emperor penguins really go for it. They soar. They can dive up to 2,000 feet, which is far deeper than any bird in the animal kingdom. And they can hold their breath for around 20 minutes, which is incredible. Longest I've gotten is 3 minutes, but I'm coming for you, Mumbles. Number 7, chinstrap penguins. Okay, from happy feet to slappy feet. Chinstrap penguins are the most aggressive of the penguin family. They're crazy. These guys are nuts. They're tiny. They have to be aggressive. I mean, look at them. They only grow up to 30 inches in length. They're so tiny, but again, they're so aggressive. They only grow up to 30 inches in length, so they have to be, you know? These ones don't tap dance. They actually crump battle you. Yeah, they embarrass you in front of you and your kin. Chinstraps are small and quick because their diet requires them to be. With krill waiting 50 miles offshore, chinstrap penguins have quite the commute. Their thick skin is also quite literal. Their blubber keeps them warm during these long commutes. As long as no leopard seals show up, their commute is pretty smooth sailing. Number 6, the sea spider. Okay, we had a few ha-has with the penguins. Now it's time to get weird. Now we know why we're here. The sea spider, thankfully, is not an actual spider. It just looks like one, kind of like daddy long legs. This is a daddy cold legs. It's a marine arthropod, and the reason it's so haunting to look at is because of polar gigantism. Many species have this. Their climate being so harsh, lack of nutrients, lack of sunlight, friends, family, etc. Scientists believe it's because sea spiders have slowed down their metabolism, so much so they require a small amount of oxygen to survive. So over time, the oxygen around these sea spiders turn them into like Captain America. They just juice them up. They take on way more than they're adapted to. And in turn, we get giant, terrifying sea bugs. Nice. Number 5, scale worms. Upon first glance, again, scale worms look microscopic. They look like tiny bacteria that are covered in scales. Hairy, weird, gross scales. They're pretty horrifying to look at. These guys are actually 8 inches long on average, so they're not tiny at all. This is what they really look like. The Antarctic scale worm is covered with elytra, these natural bristles, but the most distracting feature here has to be its mouth, head, mouth thing, yeah. This part on its mouth can literally fully retract. It can go inside out, yeah. It can suck its own mouth inside of its body, and then when it's time to eat, it pops out and then claws its prey to pieces. Horrible. I saw a video of it, I almost threw up. We went from happy feet to retractable mandibles. Cheers, that's how we do it here on MA. Number 4, glass sponges. Antarctic glass sponges. They don't get their name because they're translucent, they get their name because their skeletons contains silica, which is a literal component of glass. How neat is that? Back in 2013, a massive discovery took place. Scientists figured out how these glass sponges grow in size. Well, they figured out that they do grow in general. As our ice shelves slowly disappear, the numbers of glass sponge sightings, they increase. They don't hunt down prey at all, obviously. They spend their entire life quite still, just eating the leftovers that happen to drift along their merry way. Their food was so sparse as well, for a long time it was fully believed they couldn't possibly grow, because what would they possibly eat? The more we learn about glass sponges, the better, because these little guys tell us a lot about climate change. We're like, how is it happening? What's going on? Nothing's happening. They don't talk much. They're really quiet. They don't have mouths or eyes. Number 3, the springtail. Also known as the elephants of Antarctica, springtails are hexapods. They're exclusively land animals, whereas penguins, they sometimes, bop and swim. These guys are only on land. They're tiny as well. They measure up to about 1 millimeter on average. They look like earwigs almost. Ice earwigs that eat bacteria. Horrible. They got a big old butt too, so you're probably gonna notice if you see one walking by. They live on average 1 to 2 years, and they produce glycerol, which helps them, not freeze to death. That always helps. Antarctic springtails live longer than springtails in other parts of the world because the frigid temperatures, again, slows their metabolism down so much they can just survive off basically nothing. They're not immortal, but as far as ice insects go, they're close. They're pretty mighty. Small but mighty. Number 2, the Hoff crab. When these creatures get their names, it's often in relation to their appearance or their super ability. The immortal jellyfish ages in reverse. The glass octopus is otherwise see-through. The Hoff crab gets its name because it looks hairy, like David Hasselhoff. He's hairy as well. Yeah, David Hasselhoff just tweeted the Hoff crab with this photo. So random. Imagine following him and you see this, you're like, what's going on? Why? We love it. The scientific name later given was Kiwa tyleri, appropriately named after its discoverer, Paul Tyler from Southampton University. Found in the East Scotia Ridge on the Southern Ocean, where the water is too cold for the Hoff crab, these guys are just covered in bacteria, hence their hairy Hoff look. Because it spends so much time staying warm near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. The guy literally just sits around a deep sea campfire just collecting ice cold bacteria. What a wild life. He's a deep sea hairy caveman, essentially. When it comes time to eat, the Hoff crab just scrapes off a little bit of bacteria from any part and then just gives himself more food. He gives himself a little haircut salad. We love those. And finally, coming in number 1, the colossal squid. Not to be confused with the giant squid, those are similar but smaller. Still terrifying, but more petite. As its name gives away, the colossal squid is much larger. They live in the darkest, coldest depths surrounding the waters of Antarctica, and these squids, on average, they're around 46 feet in length, with the females being the largest of the species. The biggest and baddest, of course. They have large tentacles with suckers equipped with razor hooks, so whatever it does grab, it's certainly not letting go anytime soon. Its diet consists of large fish, and when I say large, I'm referring to, 7-foot-long Patagonian toothfish, not a goldfish. They're colossal, and they try and fight whales sometimes. They're crazy. They have no regard for the size of others. They're gonna fight anything and everyone. They're more often than not marked up, suggesting they've been in a few deep sea tussles. On top of being magnificent, they're quite mysterious. Only 2 specimens have ever been collected, with the second being recent in 2014. Some believe this is the closest living relative to the kraken. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Sound off below. Either way, I'm gonna go throw up. I never want to see any of these in real life. Awesome.
And we're starting things off with the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. So this is actually a case where the crew managed to make it back home, but it was a struggle. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, led by Sir Ernest Shackleton, aimed to cross Antarctica from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea. In August of 1914, the expedition set sail from England aboard the Endurance, a ship built to withstand the icy Antarctic waters. But in January of 1915, the ship became trapped in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea, and for months the crew waited, hoping for the ice to finally release its grip, but the Endurance eventually sank. And now the crew was stranded on drifting ice floes where they had to just camp. And when the ice finally broke in April of 1916, the crew sailed in lifeboats to reach Elephant Island. But they realized rescue was going to be unlikely there. So Shackleton and a small crew embarked on an 800-mile open boat journey to South Georgia Island, where there was a whaling station. After a grueling 16-day journey across the Southern Ocean, they reached South Georgia Island. Shackleton and a few men then trekked across the island's rugged terrain to reach the whaling station, and after several attempts, Shackleton successfully rescued the remaining crew on Elephant Island in August of that year. The Ken Boruc Air Antarctica crash. Bob Heath was an experienced Canadian pilot. He worked in the Northwest Territories, piloting scientists to ice floes to study polar bears, and during the fall he would pilot a twin otter all the way to Antarctica. This would be a 4-day-long trip. There he'd spend the entire winter piloting scientists to various research stations. When spring hit, he'd travel back home, making pit stops on his way to visit family in Winnipeg and Toronto. In 2013, Heath took off on another flight to Antarctica along with 2 other crew, and they were set to arrive at Terra Nova Bay Research Station, but they never showed up. 2 days went by with no sign of the crew until a search and rescue crew spotted the tail of the plane jutting out from a snow-covered mountain in the Queen Alexandra mountain range. The crash was determined to be unsurvivable. What makes the case even more distressing is that the bodies were never recovered, as attempting to do so would be incredibly dangerous. They had just crashed in too precarious a spot. Number 8, Flight 571. On October 13th, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, carrying 45 passengers and crew, including members of the Uruguayan rugby team and their friends and family, crashed into the Andes Mountains in Argentina. 27 of the 45-person crew had actually survived the initial crash, but they had limited food supplies, little warm clothing, and no way of communicating with the outside world. In order to survive, they resorted to pretty drastic measures. In the days following the crash, the passengers relied on first whatever meager rations they had, but as these supplies just continued to dwindle and hope of rescue began to fade, desperation set in. In order to stay alive, some of these survivors made the difficult decision to resort to cannibalism. They consumed the bodies of the deceased passengers who had died in the crash or succumbed to the harsh weather conditions, and after more than 2 months in the mountains, 2 of the passengers finally managed to make contact with 3 men on horseback, like days out from their initial crash landing site, and these guys ended up going for help, and finally, after 72 days in the wilderness, the remaining 14 survivors were rescued. In at number 7, we have the Swedish Antarctic Expedition. The Swedish Antarctic Expedition of 1901 to 1904, led by Otto Nordenskjöld, encountered a crisis when their ship, which was actually called the Antarctic, got stuck in the ice of the Weddell Sea in 1903. They were unable to free the ship, forcing the crew to abandon it. Stranded on the ice, they survived by hunting seals and penguins, melting ice for water, and constructing a basic shelter made out of stone. They waited for rescue for almost a year, and then in November of 1903, the crew managed to launch lifeboats and reached Paulet Island, finding supplies from a previous expedition. They had to camp out for yet another whole winter before finally being rescued in November of 1904 by the Argentine corvette Uruguay. A happy ending, but a failed expedition. 2 winters spent anywhere but indoors, especially in Antarctica. That is a disaster to me. Next on the list is the Mount Erebus disaster. On November 28th, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901, a sightseeing flight, crashed into Mount Erebus in Antarctica. The flight was carrying 257 passengers and crew eager to view the Antarctic landscape, and the crash was caused by a navigational error. The flight crew were relying on incorrect coordinates programmed into the aircraft's computer system, believing they were flying over McMurdo Sound, a large body of water, when in reality, they were headed directly towards Mount Erebus. And active volcano. Poor visibility due to overcast conditions and whiteout snow also made it really difficult to visually identify the mountain in time to avoid crashing into it. Upon impact, the aircraft disintegrated, taking the lives of all 257 people on board instantly. The Comandante Ferraz Station fire on February 25, 2012 at the Brazilian Antarctic Research Station in Antarctica, a deadly fire broke out. The fire resulted in the loss of 2 lives. The fire broke out in a machine room at the station, quickly spreading due to the intense winds and the flammable materials inside. 69 people present at the station were evacuated, but tragically 2 members of the Brazilian Navy lost their lives during the incident. The fire completely destroyed a significant portion of the research station, laboratories, living quarters, as well as valuable scientific equipment. It's believed that the fire broke out after an explosion caused by a short circuit. Next, we have the disappearance of Carl R. Disch. Carl Robert Disch was an ionospheric physicist working for the National Bureau of Standards. He disappeared near Byrd Station, Antarctica on May 8, 1965, and is presumed dead. Disch was stationed at the radio noise building of Byrd Station, where he conducted ionospheric studies. On the morning of May 8th, he left the radio noise building to return to the main station complex. When he failed to arrive at the main station within a reasonable time, though, a search was launched. They spotted his trail at first, but the search party had to return to the station to refuel, and by the time they returned, his trail had been covered by drifting snow and he was never found. They tried to increase the visibility of the station, they fired off flares, they used extra floodlights, but there was still no sign of him. And what made things even worse was the temperatures had dropped as low as -42. The search was eventually called off on May 14th and Disch was declared presumed dead. He was only 26 years old. Number 3, the Akademik Sholkalski. The Akademik Sholkalski, a Russian research vessel, became trapped in Antarctic ice on December 24th of 2013. Merry goddamn Christmas. The ship was carrying a team of scientists, journalists, and tourists who were on expedition to retrace the steps of Australian explorer Douglas Mawson. The situation was caused by a combination of rapidly changing weather conditions and large ice flows. And the ship's crew tried to navigate through the ice, but the surrounding ice pack just closed in around them, trapping the vessel. They tried to break through the ice, which didn't work, so they tried waiting for natural movements in the ice pack to create openings, but no luck there either. The passengers and crew were stuck for over a week until finally a Chinese icebreaker, the Zhulong, and Australian icebreaker, the Aurora Australis, were sent to assist. And after several days, the passengers and crew members were airlifted to safety by a helicopter from the Zhulong, while the remaining crew stayed aboard the ship to sail it back home once the conditions were more favorable. Eventually, a break in the ice did allow for the ship to maneuver and escape on January 7th, reaching open water and ending the entire ordeal. The tragic incident involving Jeremy Bailey, David Wild, John Wilson, and John Ross occurred in 1965 near the Heimfort Mountains in East Antarctica. So this group was traveling on a muskeg tractor and its sledges with a team of dogs running behind them. 3 of the men were in the cab of the muskeg and John Ross sat on the sledge at the back, close to the Huskies. Bailey was driving, Wild and Wilson were scanning the ice ahead. At around 8:30, the dogs alongside the sledge suddenly stopped running and the sledge came to an abrupt halt. Ross realized something was off and turned to find that the muskeg had disappeared from view. He ran up to the first sledge to see that it had wedged into the top of a large crevice that ran across their path. The muskeg had fallen about 30 meters or 100 feet into the crevice, with its tracks wedged against one ice wall and the cab flattened against the other. So Ross called out, but there was no response from the men inside the cab down there. After some time, Bailey's voice was actually heard, confirming that Wild had died, and both Bailey and Wilson were seriously injured. Ross tried descending into the crevice to help, but it was pretty treacherous. Bailey told Ross, don't come down here, don't risk it. But Ross started descending anyway. It was clear that Bailey was also severely injured, unable to move. Ross continued his attempts to reach them, but Bailey eventually stopped responding. The last sound Ross heard from the crevice was a scream from Bailey. Finally, we have the Terra Nova expedition. The Terra Nova expedition, led by Captain Robert Falcon Scott, was a British Antarctic expedition that took place between 1910 and 1913. The primary objective was to be the first to reach the South Pole. And in January 1911, the expedition established its base, known as Cape Evans on Ross Island in Antarctica. Over the next 2 years, the team conducted scientific research and made some attempts to reach the South Pole, but on January 17th of 1912, after a long and brutal journey, a 5-man party led by Scott finally reached the South Pole, only to be met with a Norwegian flag planted in the ground. Yeah, a Norwegian expedition led by Roald Amundsen had beaten them to the punch just over a month earlier. There's a photo online of the group just after they'd reached their destination and made that disappointing discovery. It's pretty rough to look at. And now, completely disheartened, the team began their long journey back to Cape Evans, but they would never make it back. They faced increasingly harsh conditions on their return journey. By late March of 1912, they were caught in a fierce blizzard, unable to continue their journey, and the men were just stuck in their tents basically. They struggled with frostbite, complete exhaustion, and starvation. Scott and his 2 remaining companions, Edward Wilson and Henry Bowers, died in extreme cold and exhaustion in their tent, just 11 miles from a supply depot. Antarctica is a barren, frozen wasteland with nothing but icebergs, snow, the occasional polar bear or penguin, and ice. But it wasn't always like this. About 90 million years ago, there was an entire rainforest in Antarctica. In February of 2017, a sediment core sample was taken from the ocean floor off the coast of Antarctica, containing fossil remnants of this ancient, swampy forest. The climate was surprisingly mild, about as warm as a pleasant spring day in parts of Europe, around 54 degrees Fahrenheit on average, with summers reaching up to a cozy 66. Rivers flowed, and the soil was rich enough to preserve ancient pollen and roots so perfectly that scientists could actually see the cell structures under a microscope. So, how did this unlikely rainforest even exist so close to the South Pole? Well, back then Antarctica wasn't the icy giant that we know today. There was barely any ice sheet, and the carbon dioxide levels in the air were way higher than they are now. So that combo created a greenhouse effect, keeping things warm enough for these plants to thrive even in the polar night.
Going off of James's point, not only did a core sample reveal ancient spores, pollen, and flowering plants, radio echo sounding revealed an entire previously unknown landscape littered with subglacial mountains, or in simpler terms, a vast expansion of hills and valleys were discovered hidden beneath the ice in Antarctica that scientists believed were once covered in lush greenery supported by a subtropical climate rather than covered in the permafrost of a frozen tundra. Without ever laying eyes on the area, which stretches over 32,000 square kilometers or 12,000 miles, scientists were able to map out the landscape and determine its highest highs and lowest lows. With the way the Earth's warming, there is a chance that in the year 3000 our great-great-great-granddaughters will be doing fine, hiking the mountains of Antarctica that have once again revealed themselves to the planet. That is, if we don't all die off before then.
Now, at one time, in fact throughout most of history, there were giant bugs everywhere. Yet another thing to add to your list of things you appreciate about the modern world, the size of our bugs and insects, which is little for the most part. Creatures 300 million years ago, though, weren't so lucky. At the time, the planet was covered in vast, swampy forests, and the atmosphere contained a lot more oxygen, about 50% more than what we breathe today. So it would have been pretty humid and swampy and perfect for flies. All this oxygen fueled an explosion of life, including some terrifyingly large insects right out of a 50s monster movie. You had flies as big as modern seagulls, with wings spanning over 2 feet. Yuck. Imagine one of those things swooping down and gnawing at you. Imagine how loud their buzzing would have been. There would have been gigantic beetles, bees, or stuff that was similar. Total nightmare world. But as Earth's climate and ecosystems changed over millions of years, the giant insects eventually disappeared, thank God, forming into the smaller insects and bugs that we have today.
Next up, we have, as James and I both previously mentioned, evidence of ancient trees, but believe it or not, there is actually even more evidence than what was found in the core sample you see. In a small part of Alexander Island, located on the west coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, scientists actually found the fossils of trees dating back to 100 million years ago. Their logs measuring in at around 25 feet and still standing upright, their roots still attached to the soil deposits from which they grew. The existence of these trees prove the theory of both the temperatures of Antarctica and the existence of a vast network of river systems. How? Well, because the plants found in the area would have not survived in the frigid temperatures of modern-day Antarctica, and their root systems clearly indicate that they would have only thrived in a landscape of rich plains adorned with a large network of rivers.
Earth used to be full of giant mushrooms. Around 400 million years ago, some of the tallest things around were mushrooms called prototaxites. These ancient fungi dominated the landscape, reaching heights of up to 26 feet and widths of about 3 feet. Now, unlike the mushrooms we're familiar with today, protaxites didn't have the recognizable caps on the top, like the muffin-looking things. Instead, they resembled just massive trunk-like structures going straight up from the ground. They were basically like fungal pillars, which sounds really gross, but probably looked pretty cool. Fossils of protaxites have been discovered on every continent. Scientists believe that they played a big role in Earth's early ecosystems. Their size and the fact that they were found all over the globe means they were well adapted to the conditions of the time. I'd love if this was still a thing today. I'd jump around on mushrooms like Mario.
Speaking of well-adapted, recently scientists found ancient bacteria in Antarctica like nothing we have ever seen on Earth before. Like, it's so strange, scientists wonder if it might possibly have come from another planet, perhaps a passenger on an ancient asteroid that arrived on Earth millions of years ago. Why do they think that? Well, generally bacteria have a minimum requirement of 6 things they need in order to survive: food, acidity, time, generally warm temperature, oxygen, and moisture. This bacteria just needs air, making it an absolute scientific anomaly and raising a lot of questions about Antarctica back in the day. Like, first of all, what conditions led to this bacteria calling Antarctica home? And has it always been here, or did it migrate from somewhere else? Did it like the warmth? Does it prefer the cold? Did it arrive on Earth on the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs? Well, right now we really have no idea, but here's to hoping we can find out more in the near future because, well, it's pretty neat.
Turns out the color of our planet would have looked very different at the dawn of time too. There would have been a lot more purple. Imagine looking at Earth from space billions of years ago, and instead of all the green that we see today, the entire planet is just bathed in shades of purple. See, when life first appeared on our planet, it likely wasn't the familiar green we associate with plants today. Instead, the earliest life forms are believed to have absorbed sunlight using a molecule called retinol, which gives off a bit of a purple hue. So if you were an astronaut looking at Earth billions of years back, it would have looked like a giant purple marble spinning in space. This purple phase in Earth's history lasted for a long time, roughly 1.6 billion years. And during this period, some of Earth's oceans were tinged purple as well because of a thick layer of purple sulfur bacteria. These bacteria thrived in oxygen-poor environments and use a different method of photosynthesis compared to modern plants. So instead of oxygen, they produced sulfur compounds, turning the oceans into this sea of purple. But as life evolved, plants started using chlorophyll to absorb sunlight, and Earth began to transform into the green planet that we know and love today. Chlorophyll is more efficient at capturing sunlight, so green became the dominant color as plants evolved and spread across the planet. I would have loved to see it all purple though. That would have been interesting.
Alright, so as many of you may know, Antarctica is full of hidden gems and is generally things that you wouldn't expect. I mean, take a rainforest hiding underneath its permafrost for one, and for two, how about the fact that the continent is absolutely littered with active volcanoes, including Mount Erebus, which is an active 1.3 million year old volcano that just so happens to be the southernmost active volcano in the world, home to one of Earth's very few permanent lava lakes. There are only 5 that we know of to date. Now, while it's no purple planet, it would have certainly been interesting to see Antarctica 7.5 to 1.3 million years ago during the formation of Mount Erebus and some 138 other volcanoes in the area. While it would have still been quite frigid, Antarctica cooled about 34 million years ago, it would have certainly been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have been able to witness the shift in tectonic plates, opening up various pathways for hot magma to come flowing up to the surface of the Earth. As long as you kept your distance, of course.
It wasn't just the planets that were a different color, it was the sky and ocean as well. Earth would have looked totally alien billions of years ago, would have had an orange sky like Mars, and the oceans would have been green at one point. 3.7 billion years ago, the oceans were green because of the iron that was mixing into the seawater. So this iron would have rusted and tinted the water. This iron would have given the water this rusted, tinted kind of look. Instead of the deep blues and dark greens that we have today, ancient seas were a brighter greenish hue, and most of the land would have been black, covered in cooling lava. And then there's the sky. Today our sky is blue because of the scattering of sunlight by oxygen molecules in our atmosphere, but around this time, oxygen levels were actually much lower. So the sky wasn't blue, it was mostly methane. You would have seen this warm orange haze all the time.
And finally, we have Lake Vostok, a freshwater lake hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheets, containing 22 cavities of liquid water averaging at 10 kilometers or 6 miles each, discovered in the 1970s. It is estimated that 15 million years ago, the once free-flowing Lake Vostok was sealed off under a 3-kilometer, 1.9 mile thick sheet of ice, meaning that at one time Vostok flowed on the surface of Antarctica, rising and falling with the tides about 12 millimeters or 0.46 inches per day. Now the lake sits in complete darkness under the ice, under 5,150 pounds per square inch of pressure. But don't let that fool you. Scientists still believe that this unfrozen river residing below Antarctica's frozen surface is not only rich in oxygen, but also incredibly rich in life. They believe that organisms living in the lake have been evolving in an incredibly unique way, undisturbed for the last 15 million years. While it would be amazing to catch a glimpse of what the lake looked like back then, I have to say I'm pretty curious to see what's going on now too. Too bad Antarctica is closed off to the public and run by the government, because it's hiding aliens.
It is.
But that's another video.
All right, well, we will be back very shortly to speak with you again about something else crazy and wondrous, huh?
We sure will. Yeah.
All right, Gucci. What does that mean?
It's like good.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about facts from history that they won't teach you in school. Schools refuse to teach anyone about these moments from history, so we're going to show you what schools won't. Click the video now to find out more.